Hey, this is Brian again, and I'd like to ask you to do a favor. We can't do this work without people like you, so if you can, please like, share, subscribe, tell your friends about Bring Back the Porch. Hello. Recently, we moved off the porch and onto the stage of the historic Monarch Theater. We were there at the invitation of the Medicine Hat Historical Society to spend an evening with renowned local artist James Marshall. His work is seen all over Medicine Hat and around the world. And we invite you now to join us as we spend an hour and a half with James as he talks about growing up in Medicine Hat in the 40s and 50s and becoming an artist. This episode of Bring Back the Porch brought to you by Bernie Leahy, River Street Realty. Let's get you home. And I am very pleased to be here tonight because when Bruce sent me the email, he said, would you be interested in being the moderator on an evening with Jim Marshall? And I thought, maybe for 2 seconds, I hit yes, because I have been a fan of Jim Marshall's work all my life. Getting to know Jim over the last 2 weeks here as we've been preparing for this has been a joy for me because he's told me lots of stories about things that happened when he was growing up in Medicine Hat. All good knowledge for future episodes. One of the things that you said to me, though, was, why me? And I said, why not you? Your fingerprint is everywhere. You cannot go anywhere in Medicine Hat without seeing your work. So I'm honored to be here tonight, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, I thought I had deep roots in this community because my grandfather came here in 1904. Your family history here in Medicine Hat goes long ways past mine.
Not a long ways.
But you had great-grandfather? Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us about how Marshalls came to be here in Medicine Hat.
Well, I've always been real glad that when they got here, they stayed. My dad's grandparents came from Ireland, from Dublin, and they came to Medicine Hat and they stayed. And my mom's great-grandparents, the Richardson's Bakery, came from Glasgow, Scotland, and they stayed. And I'm ever so glad.
So are we. You know what year that was, Jim?
I don't, actually.
Okay.
But I think right at the turn of the century, somewhere around 1890s.
Okay, so that would be when it was
18.
still a town. So how many Marshalls were there?
Well, there were 5 brothers, all of them in building, carpentry, finishers, painters, and they built a number of really nice homes in Medicine Hat. That's one of them that they built for their parents on Allowance Avenue, and it's still there. And I did a research, and I think we're up to about 18 really nice, mostly 2-story homes throughout the city. My mom's family were bakers back to Scotland. When they came to Canada, they stayed in Toronto for a while, built a bakery there, and then decided to keep on moving. They went to Winnipeg, built a bakery there, and finally came to Medicine Hat. I'm glad for that. My great-grandfather, Richardson, bought the original, the first bakery in Medicine Hat, the Leonard Bakery, which is down on 4th Street Southeast in the Flats. The building's still there. It's not a bakery anymore, but my grandfather he carried on to Redcliffe and built a pastry bakery in Redcliffe. And his building was a victim in the big tornado that went through Redcliffe. His building was flattened. So he moved back to Medicine Hat, took over the bakery down in the flats on 4th Street Southeast, and my great-grandfather, Richardson, went out to 4th Street Southwest, almost at Gershaw Drive, and built a bakery there.
That building is still there too, I believe, is it?
That building isn't there
Oh, it's
anymore.
not there, okay.
That building was Richardson's before I was really noticing things. It was sold out when he retired to Weston's.
Okay.
So it was always Weston's Bakery when I was a kid. I lived right across the street.
So the air always smelled good with fresh
Oh,
bakery.
yeah. I used to sneak in there quite a bit.
Now we come to your dad, Val.
Oh, my dad. My dad was quite a guy. He was born and raised in Medicine Hat, raised in the flats mainly. Went to Montreal Street School and ultimately Alexandra. In grade 10, he lost his father. And so he had to go to work. And he went downtown looking for a job, and he got a job at E.N. Dowson Printing. And he stayed there pretty well the rest of his life, except for the time spent in the Army. Mom, she started off in the flats on 4th Street. See what we. My dad went to Montreal Street School and worked at E.N. Dowson Printing until the war. And
That was out of necessity because of your passing of his father.
yes, that was. And he actually, to make a little bit more money, and because he was keen about the military anyway, he joined the local militia as well. And during the Second World War, he got called up really, really quickly because of being in the Army already. He trained in Calgary to start with. He was also selected to go down to Helena, Montana, to take a commando course and small weapons and some hand-to-hand training. And then he went back to Calgary to train troops to start with.
I think he was also training at the armories.
Yeah, he was training at the armories.
I think you have a picture of that.
Good. Thanks for telling me.
You're welcome. There's Connaught School.
That's hard to see.
There you go.
There's the armory.
Yep.
Well, he was there with his best friend, training out in front of the building on the road. They were marching, and my mother and her best friend, Jinty Dryden, were walking by on their way downtown to go to a movie, probably right here. And my dad said to Craig, do you see that gal, that pretty girl with the dark hair? I'm going to marry that girl. And he did. That was me ma.
Mm-hmm. I think you have a wedding picture.
Okay. Yeah. Wedding picture there.
And then the honeymoon?
We always called this Bonnie and Clyde.
It's quite a distinguished couple.
I remember the end of the war. My grandmother passed away when Mom was carrying me. Dad was in the Army, and Mom was on her own, and my grandfather was on her own. So we moved in with my grandfather and spent the whole war with him. And I do remember the end of the war as a kid. There was a ramp in the back of the house that they walked out on to hang up clothes on the clothesline. And we sat on that and watched the fireworks from Crescent Heights Hill. It was fired off about where the Medicine Hat Golf Club house is.
Yeah.
And I remember it like it was yesterday.
You would have been about 6 years old then.
I'd have been about 6.
Because you were born April 10th, 1939.
I was. That makes me an old dude.
Means you got another birthday coming up.
I do.
Yeah.
I was really not very aware of my dad for the first 6 years of my life. And it was pretty neat when he came home. I was going to Earl Kitchener School at the time, and I remember him having breakfast with me, and we were still staying at my grandfather's, and he was somewhere else. His mind was miles away. He was sitting there thinking, first day home, and he was going to work that day downtown, and we were having breakfast, and he was eating toast with strawberry jam on it, I remember.
Yeah. I think you have another picture of your dad, too.
Do I?
I think so.
I'm sure glad you're here.
Yeah. Yeah, that said Mawada Barracks, I think, up in Calgary, or Mawada Stadium, where the training that your father took.
I should have had that up when he was doing his Army bit. And there he is there. You can see he's a pretty tough guy. And you can't imagine being raised by him after he came home.
All Army, all discipline, I imagine.
Mm-hmm. And you couldn't outrun him. At least I couldn't then.
Yeah.
I was in grade 1 at Earl Kitchener. I remember walking the first day to school with my mom, and then when Dad came home and we had this breakfast and his staring out the window kind of goofy, I was really keen to get to know him, and we walked together. He was heading downtown to work, and I was heading to Earl Kitchener, so I took the route with him down 3rd Street to the Armories, and we parted company there. A friend of mine, Jimmy Wright, met me there, and we carried on to Earl Kitchener, and my dad trundled down 3rd Street Hill to his shop. What's next?
Grade 2.
Grade 2.
Grade 2.
Earl Kitchener School.
Yeah, with Miss Henderson.
Miss Henderson, there were 2 Miss Hendersons. One was the principal at Earl Kitchener, and the other was a roving art teacher for all the public schools in town. She was a really neat lady, and of course, because she was teaching art, I was keen about her. And she introduced us to plasticine this one day. I had never seen it before, and she said, we're going to model things out of this. She gave me a nice good lump and said, make something out of this. She said to the whole class, let's everybody make something. And we all got working away, making things. And she came around to see what I was doing, and I was modeling a horse. And she seemed to be very impressed and got all excited and said she wanted to go get her sister to have a look.
Her sister was the principal.
She was the principal. While they were gone, I crushed it. Why would I do something like that? She was some upset. Why did you do that? She said. I don't know.
See, today that would be worth a lot of money, the first creation of James Marshall.
Anyway, she did forgive me, and we let it go at that.
I think he moved into a 2-story house.
Yes, then he started making a little money, and he bought the 2-story house on 4th Street Southwest, and we all moved in there. And that's where I was totally raised, in that house. I had two brothers, by the way, I forgot to mention that. My two brothers came along after the war, a couple of nice lads, and they got to live in a couple of more places. I only lived in that house on 4th, and for a little while, the house on 8th Street, Southwest. In grade 3, I was to move to Konrad School.
Yeah.
And my friend Ralph Richardson, my cousin Ralph Richardson, who was a couple of years older than me, warned me that there was going to be a hazing. that one of two things is going to happen. They're either going to take the grade 8s, the big grade 8s, they're going to take the grade 3s, and they're going to take you down the basement and dunk your head in the toilet. Ralph said that's what happened to me. And he always claimed because he had lots of hair when he was older, and I obviously don't, and I think it was probably because he got his head dunked in the toilet. The other thing that they were going to do is chase you down, take you to the back of the school grounds where there was a huge pile of tumbleweeds. They pulled down your pants. One kid got your wrists and the other your ankles, and you got pitched into the tumbleweeds.
I think I'd take the toilet.
No, I don't think so. Anyway, the warning was good for me. I outhid them. I outran them. And it took them a month to catch me. A great big kid by the name of Alan Turcott, I swear he shaved in grade 8. So he might have been there for a while. He finally caught me. And he caught me inside the bakery at Weston's Bakery on 4th Street, where I was hiding, and he did get me, drugged me all the way back to Konrad School, where there was a gang waiting. My pants came down, and I went into the tumbleweeds.
Ooh.
Wasn't all that bad. Where are we next?
A great race.
Oh, the great race.
Yeah, well, let's talk about some of the teachers you had.
Yeah, Konrad School had some really good teachers. Ken Forbes will remember Ernie Block.
I was a student of Ernie Block,
Ernie Block?
typing in Lethbridge.
Oh, in Lethbridge you would be. Well, he had that thing, if you were a little bad in school, he'd come up behind you and hit you on the head with his knuckle. And there was Mr. Mackenzie, everybody called him Spud. He was a really neat guy. Mr. Milliken was the teacher, was the principal. And Dorothy Williams, who became Dorothy Jones, was one of the teachers. And we had an athletic teacher, Mr. Stevens, Dick Stevens. He and I became pretty good friends. He was a real runner, and I was a runner too. I loved running. And while we were in school, there became a big race in Medicine Hat. It started in Redcliffe at the town hall, and you ran down the Redcliffe Highway and through Riverside across the Findlay Bridge to the City Hall in Medicine Hat. And it was wide open to the city, and all of the students in the school system were invited to be in it. So there was a fair gang of people running down the highway. And Mr. Stevenson won the seniors, and I won the juniors.
Do you remember what you won? Do you remember what the prize was?
We got a nice big trophy,
Oh,
about that big. Yeah.
congratulations.
And I lost it. So,
And then you were also, I think, a baseball player.
well, we did play baseball. I track and running, and that's that sort of thing. We played murder ball. Murder ball at Konrad School was football with no rules, and we had a pretty good team. But one thing I have to mention though about grade 8, Miss Wenzel. I was in her homeroom, and she announced at the end of the year that she was failing the entire class except 2 girls. So obviously I was one of them. Yeah, it was a little shocking to go home and face the sergeant. But I met some good guys. Oh, there's some of my early drawings.
Yeah, airplanes. That's
During the war, I drew these. Earl Kitchener School, my house that I lived in 4th and grew up in. And that's what it looked like on the prairie. My house is that place right there. And you can see all kinds of prairie behind me. I walked across the prairie completely to Konrad School back in those days.
Just to help orient people here, at the top of the picture is the South Saskatchewan River, Lions Park, and then as you go a little bit further south, that dark line is the CP rail yards. So we're looking to the east from roughly, I suppose, somewhere near where the hospital is today.
Well, this is 4th, Gershaw Drive, 3rd, which is now the fast street downtown. There's the armories and the hill, 3rd Street Hill and Division Avenue.
And there was a big swamp there too. You had to walk through a swamp, I think, to get to Konrad School.
The swamp ran all the way down 7th Street to the top of Gershaw Drive.
And
We'll get to that in a minute.
Still carries the water today.
So, Earl Kitchener School, there's me and my little Shetland pony that I had staked out at the back. Nice little horse, except he always tried to bite me when I was getting on him. And he trampled me lots of times when I was bringing him in from where I had him staked out on the prairie, because he knew he was getting oats at that point. So he was in a pretty big hurry to get to the little barn. I used to ride with Freddie Hall. Freddie Hall was a great guy. Most of you know him, or did. And I would get my horse saddled and to his place early in the morning so I could get in on breakfast at their place. His mom was a great cook, really put a good breakfast together. And I tied my horse up to their fence at the back, and we had our breakfast and came out, and by God, my horse was gone, and so was a section of their fence. So we decided we'd probably find everything down in the coulee, which is Kin Coulee now. At that time, it was just a natural coulee. And we went down into the coulee, and yep, there she was, and the fence still tied on. And looking pretty sheepish, I thought. This horse had a pretty sad look on his face. Anyway, we got him loose, took the horse up the hill, and then went back down and carried that fence up the hill. And we had to put it all back together again. And we sort of gave up the ride that day. Anyway, there's the Westminster Scout Troop. Bill Webb was the leader, Skipper Webb. He was a great guy. He was a tank commander in his day. He was a tank sergeant in the war. Told us a lot of good stories when we were kids. And he was a great guy for taking us camping and staying overnight in places out in the country, and it was really quite fantastic time. A number of us joined the Air Cadets as well, and that was a good time. We used to go to Claire's home. The Air Cadets from around Alberta held a track meet at Claresholm Air Base, and we competed against each other as air cadets in track and field, and then we got to ride in Harvard airplanes for about 20 minutes or so, and that was pretty thrilling. What's next?
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about the slough and how you used to make fun in the wintertime by skating on this slough.
Yeah, the slough, it froze in the winter, and we did skate on it. There was a telephone pole that was put up when my mom was a kid, and they used to skate on that slough as well when she was a little girl. And they put a light on this pole, and they could skate at night. When we got to skating there years later, the pole was there, but the light was gone. But the pole didn't stay there, actually. It got chopped down, and we cut it up and made a raft. And that way we could get across the slough to Konrad School. Kent Forbes, he was the main skipper on the raft. And we asked most of the teachers that lived on that side of the slough that if they want to ride, we'd give them a ride across. Mary Carr was the only one that went on. Mm-hmm. Miss Wenzel decided not to. She rode a bike to school. She tried to ride through on the road through the slough. She didn't make it. Now she wishes she had got on the raft. She'd stay dry.
Konrad was one of the busy schools on the Southwest Hill from early in, 1912, 1914, all the way, still going today.
Yeah, it was built in 1912, and it's been a good school all the way.
You got a job in grade 7.
I did. I got a job at my dad's printing shop, and where am I?
He gave you a job after school and on Saturday mornings.
Yeah, I washed the ink off the presses after school every day at 4 o'clock. I delivered parcels, first of all, and I had a bike with a great big carrier on it. My dad put this huge carrier on it, and if you've had that carrier full of packed printing equipment, you can't imagine how heavy that was. I had a few crashes, and I rode this bike for a couple or 3 years around town delivering stuff, and then washing the presses, and then sweeping the floors, and took me till about 8 o'clock by the time I was finished. And one really cold winter night, there was a heck of a blizzard blowing, and I wondered how I was going to walk all the way home from downtown out to 8th Street near Gershaw Drive, and I got this bright idea. Moore's Furniture was next door, and they always had big cardboard boxes at the back of the building, and one end was sealed and the other end was open always. So I cut a little slot in it, put the box over my head so that the slot I could see, and I walked all the way home under a cardboard box. Now, was that stupidity or ingenuity?
Necessity is the mother of invention.
I must have looked pretty stupid.
You had a career day at Konrad.
Oh, a
that
career
had
day
a
at
very.
Konrad. That's right. Ron Dooley and I went to career day. Ronnie and I met in grade 1 at Earl Kitchener, so we were old buddies. And we went and toured all of the people with career ideas of, what we could become one day, that sort of thing. And we wandered through them all, and then we were going to Ron's house after we did this, and I said to Ron, "What are you going to do? Have you decided? What are you going to do?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "I'm going to be an engineer." I said, "What?" He going to be an engineer. Yeah, he says. And he became an engineer. I couldn't believe it. He asked me what I was going to do, and I didn't have a clue. I said, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I didn't know in grade 12.
Yeah. But then you went off to Alexandra School, where football became something.
Well, yeah, in grade 9, the grade 8s, most of us should have been in grade 9, and we were playing murder ball at Connaught, so we were pretty good at football. And there was a kind of a little bit of play between Leonard Cooper and Dick Stevens. There was a competition there. And Dick Stevens challenged Cooper to put a team together of high school students to play his new grade 9s, just coming to the high school. And we played them at the very start of the grade 9 school year, and we played to a 0-0 tie. So we played pretty good. So
you get a driver's license.
I had a driver's license, and I had to deliver a bunch of parcels. So I'm a 16-year-old kid, and I had to drive a whole big load of things down to Maple Leaf Mill. And my dad said, well, you'll have to take the station wagon. So I loaded the station wagon up and drove down to Maple Leaf. And as I went over the bridge, I noticed a beautiful big gravel parking lot. And I parked in front of the building and unloaded the parcels and got back in the car. And when I put it in reverse, I really gunned her and spun the wheels, and I was spinning back, and I cranked the wheel, and I spun the car around and went spinning through the gravel to the bridge, down to the printing shop, and I pulled in the back lane to park the car, and my dad was standing at the back door. Well, that was kind of strange. And so I walked over and up the steps, and he held out his hand, and I put the keys in his hand, and he said, "You're back on your bike." Yeah. That was the last time I drove his car.
So then you get a job working at the airport.
Yeah, nice summer job. Well, I had no job at the printing shop anymore. And I got a job at the airport. I rode my motorcycle out there every day to work through the summer. Bill Francis was in charge there. He was an ex-pilot from the Second World War. He was a really neat guy, and my job was gassing airplanes, washing airplanes, and moving them in and out of the hangars. And I was in my glory there, I must say. Also at the airport was Professor Caldwell. And you might remember in the paper just recently, there was an aircraft called a ornithopter that was being built at the airport by Professor Caldwell. And he had a number of people in Medicine Hat helping. He designed it, but there were other people like the Shannon brothers. The Shannon brothers had a motel at the bottom of Dunmore Hill, just before you go over the creek. And he had a big shop there, and they built a lot of things in that shop. They were gas fitters and that sort of thing. They did all the gas lines in the brick plants and so on, and all of the kilns in Medicine Hat. And they did quite a bit of the iron work on the ornithopter. The ornithopter had a motorcycle engine in it and a seat up front. Now, does that look like something that would fly?
I don't think I would want to get on it.
They got a test pilot from Claresholm. He was a pilot, and he came and sat at that front seat. And from Bert's photos, if some of the older ones, people probably remember Bert's photos downtown, right near, just 2 doors over from the Monarch. He was one of the investors and helpers, and he had a nice big DeSoto car, and he pulled the ornithopter from the hangar to the runway. I was permitted to ride my motorcycle on the runway as long as I stayed right out on the edge and didn't get in the way. And this pilot strapped himself into the front seat, and they fired this thing up, and the wings were flapping up and down, and they started to move forward, and I carried on my bike with him, and he got going up a fair speed, but he didn't rise off the ground an inch. So the little frustration amongst the investors, and there were several of them in the DeSoto, so they hooked a big long rope on the thing and pulled it back up to the starting gate again, and then maneuvered the DeSoto in front of the ornithopter and stretched out the rope. Now they're going to pull this thing down the runway. And they did. They pulled it down the runway, and they got up a pretty good speed. That DeSoto had lots of power. And that ornithopter got up in the air about the length of the rope, and then onto the pavement. I heard every swear word that was ever invented by the pilot.
You expanded your vocabulary.
Woo-ha. And he stalked off. He didn't wait for a ride or anything. He took off from the runway to the field at the airport to get his car, and he was gone.
Yeah. So you were one of the first classes at Medicine Hat High School?
Yeah, we were one of the first classes at Medicine Hat High. And I think the class ahead of us, my former class, we were the first grads out of there.
Mm-hmm. And then you were still playing sports, though.
Oh, yeah.
Where were the sports fields?
No, always playing sports.
Yeah. You were playing at Bassett Reserve, wherever that was.
Yeah, Bassett Reserve was where Safeway's on Division Avenue is today.
Mm-hmm.
There was a big ballpark there, and we played our Medicine Hat football games against other schools in the Bassett Reserve.
Okay.
And we also played down at Riverside on a baseball diamond there too.
Okay.
Because we didn't have a field. All the time I was in high school, we didn't have the outdoor facilities that all came along later. They really got great stuff there now. We practiced football on the prairie.
Mm-hmm.
I've got 4 teeth on the prairie there somewhere.
Yeah.
Everybody was pretty busy. High school was a busy place.
And you were spending a lot of time at Ernie's.
Oh yeah. Ernie's was where the boys hung out. The chocolate shop is where the girls hung out.
You never walked across the road?
Oh yeah, we did.
Okay.
Yeah. And the girls came over to Ernie's just to see what it was like a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was all pretty good.
Yeah, now Ernie's was in the Aberdeen shopping area there between Aberdeen and Belfast.
Yeah, right across the street from the chocolate shop.
Yeah.
So grade 10.
I think you got a summer job working on the CPR.
I did. Well, actually, Sonny Moore, Donnie Crane, and I, we got a job with the CPR Extra Gang. Can you imagine that? Little high school guys going to work at the Extra Gang, where you work 10 hours, 12 hours a day, carrying jacks that weigh 50 pounds, shoveling gravel. It was crazy, but we did last all summer. A lot of them didn't.
Yeah.
There was a real mix of characters there. There was some guys that were from an institution that weren't too bad. There were a lot of guys from Europe that everybody called DPs back in the day. Real good guys, and there were several of them working there. Some good fights broke out at lunches. It was a real education.
Uh-huh.
We slept in a boxcar. We ate along the tracks for lunch and ate in a boxcar for supper and breakfast. It was pretty crude.
And I imagine it was pretty hot.
And when we got a weekend off, we hopped freight trains going through, and ran like the dickens to catch them and jump on. And the one I remember the best was we couldn't catch the car we wanted. We caught a car that had low sides on it, about this high. And when we got in it, we found out it was a coal hauler.
Uh-oh.
And you can imagine once that thing gets up to speed, what it was like to be in a coal car. We were as black as... And when we jumped off the train, you had to jump off while the train was still going a pretty good clip, because they had yard bulls at the CPR station back in the day. They didn't take kindly to guys hopping trains. And we jumped off in the dark, like at 1 a.m, and there's switches and things along the tracks. Why we didn't get ourselves killed, I have no idea. And we got ourselves sorted out, and we were so dirty, so black, we decided to go up to the hill pool and climb over the fence and leave our clothes on and go for a swim. Well, it didn't help a lot, but it did help some. When I got home, and it was really, really a hot summer, I had a bedroom in the downstairs in the basement on the house on 8th Street, and Mom decided to sleep in my bedroom where it was a lot cooler. And my brothers were sleeping in the rumpus room, and I decided not to disturb anybody. I would just take the screen off the bedroom window, it was a basement window, and crawl in. Next thing I knew, I was getting beaten to death with a hockey stick. My mom thought it was a burglar coming.
Oh, boy. And then you got a job at the glass factory.
Yeah.
Another summer job.
Yeah, there was lots of us got jobs at the glass factory. The first 2 years, 2 summers, first summer I was in the boxing room where they boxed up all the stuff, and that's where all the girls were. And I couldn't stand being around all those girls. And the second year, Bert Kleiss and we got into the machine room, and we spent the whole summer barreling beer glasses. And it's a really, really hot job. So they had 2 guys on it. You worked a half an hour on, half an hour off. And you'd sit out or clean up around that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The last job I got at that summer, and I was in grade 11, and Gordon Flug and I were chumming around together that summer, and we decided that we weren't going to work at the glass factory another summer. We were going to load our gear into this car, my 1949 Meteor, and head down east and not go back to school. And the night before we were to leave, I went up to his house to get his stuff so we could get away early. And he took the longest time to come out from when I pulled up to his house. He took quite a while coming out. And then finally he came out and he leaned into my car and he said, "I decided I'm not going." And I said, "Oh, you're not going to go, eh, Gord? Okay, well, see ya." And I drove back downtown to my house. I jacked the car up, blocked it, took all the wheels off that night, and the next day I got on the Canadian.
Now, you had also been working at the CPR again at the Roundhouse.
Oh, yeah, I worked. I knew I was going to do that.
Yeah. I think you have a picture of the Roundhouse, too.
Yeah, we were planning to go, and he was working and getting some money up, and I got a job at the Roundhouse, and I was related to Ray Collier. He was the foreman there, and he let me work double shifts. So I'd go to work at 8 o'clock in the morning and go home at 8 o'clock at night. And I made quite a little bit of money. And then I went to pick up Gordon's stuff, and he wasn't going to go. And so I ended up at the train station the next night, and I was gone.
Yeah.
And I spent the whole trip to Toronto. I had a ticket to Toronto, riding in the observation car, and slept there too, because I only had a ticket for a seat. And there was some nice people I met there. They were from Toronto, and I didn't know a thing about Toronto and what I was going to do or where I was going to go. And I asked them where would be an easy place to stay for a while that wouldn't be expensive, and I could kind of cool out and look for a job and that kind of thing. And they said, well, stay at the Y, the Central Y downtown. So I thought, good idea. So I did. I stayed at the Y. I loved it there. There was a track and swimming pool, and it was a heck of a good place to stay, and met a few guys there. I met a especially good, neat guy by the name of Bruce St. John. He was a little older fella. He was from Barbados. He was from Barbados. A black guy, and he's just the sweetest guy ever. And he was studying opera. He was a classical singer, and he was studying at the Toronto Conservatory. I'd say I was 17. He was about 21 or so. And he liked, and in those days, the jazz bands, like Louis Armstrong and the Count Basie and all those guys, they were traveling the big circuit, and they were coming to Toronto and putting on shows at the theater there. And we both really liked that stuff, so we'd buy a ticket and go, and took in these jazz fests, and they were really good. And then he finished up at the conservatory and went back to Barbados, and I had a part-time job at a printing shop, and but I wasn't making much money. And I saw in the paper they were looking for people to build switchboards and install them. You'd build this, wire them all up, switchboards, and you'd take them somewhere and install them. And back in those days, all the offices, big offices, had big switchboards in them, and that's how the phone services worked. And I was a little underage, actually. I was only 17 and a half about, and you had to be 18, and I lied. And he did the math, and he wasn't going to let me go to the school. So and then he thought it over after I kind of whined a bit, and he let me go. And I learned, and he said the best reason that he let me go is that I had really incredible eyesight, and I did. I had the highest mark they ever got, actually. And you had to have really good color, like my dad couldn't do it. He was colorblind. And we went to our first job in Niagara Falls to install a big outfit there. And one of the instructors went with two of us, two students, and we installed it real nicely, and it took us a couple of weeks. And because it was pretty easy to install one, another thing building it. And then we went for beer after. And he said, you guys are pretty good guys. And he said, I really feel I got to tell you that you're going to be obsolete in no time flat, because they're not going to do these big switchboards anymore. There's a whole new technology coming up, and you're not going to be, you won't be working anymore building switchboards. So we wondered what we were going to do. Those two guys went back to Toronto, and I said, I'm going to join the Marines. And I went across the border at Buffalo and went to the Marine station there, and they wouldn't take me. Mainly because I was a foreigner. And they did take foreigners from time to time, but they weren't then. But they said, why you want to join anyway? And I said, well, I wanted to see if I could do the boot camp. I was really wanting to know if I could do boot camp, which was pretty tough.
I think you got a picture of boot camp somewhere here.
No, I don't.
Oh, you?
I tried tried like mad to get one, but I couldn't find one.
Yeah.
Anyway, the guy said to me, well, he said, if that's all you're interested in, and he said, there is another camp nearby, same instructors, same stuff. You're just not going to be a Marine. I said, okay, let's do it. So I did, and I reveled in it. I climbed those barricades and you ran all the time. And I was a runner. You weren't allowed to walk anywhere. If you were going to the bathroom or going to lunch or anything, you ran. You had to run all the time. And you ran out in the country and up the hills and everywhere. It was just amazing. Crawled through culverts full of mud. You did all kinds of stuff. And then, of course, you learned to shoot. And they were also teaching us about spying a little bit on because it was a covert operation. So they wanted you to, if they sent you somewhere that you to spy on troops, that you weren't doing any shooting or anything. You were just kind of seeing what's going on.
You could have been James Marshall, the spy. Marshall.
Yeah.
James Marshall.
Yeah. But anyway, it didn't get that far. It got terminated, and we were disbanded, and I went back to Toronto and came home. But there was an adventure, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. But when you were in the East, you did do a little work in a printing plant, and you learned about it.
I did. I worked in a printing plant. Printing plants were changing. They were old, hot metal, linotypes and all that sort of stuff. Copy made on metal strips that were locked into a form on a press to print. And there was a new thing happening called offset printing or lithography. And when I was down east at the time, I got a little job in a printing shop, and they were already into it down east. And so I learned to run a press, and I hung around there after hours and watched what they did in the dark rooms and the makeup rooms and stuff. I got a pretty good idea what lithography was all about. And when I came home, I was telling my dad about it, and the foreman at the shop, Ron Corns, and they were all already getting excited about getting into lithography and preparing for it. And
they built a dark room, I think?
Well, we built a dark room. We bought a small camera and a small printing press. But they thought if we're going to really get into this, we should send you back to Toronto, and you could take the course at Ryerson with Kodak sponsors. And so I went back to Toronto, and I spent some time at Ryerson, and I got into more things there than just printing, but I took some art classes there too. And I learned a fair bit, came back home, and we changed the shop completely. And we had a lady that had a millinery shop as part of the shop, printing shop, and she moved out, and then we moved upstairs into her space. And that was good. And then what happened was, and there's...
Yeah, we go back to about 1960s now.
So, Bob Muchler was a good pal of mine. He was working at Benny Motors as a parts guy. And I said, do you want to train for a lithographer, to be a printer. And he said, yeah, I'd like to do that. I don't think I'm going anywhere here. So he came over. I did train him, and he worked with me, and we worked a number of years together. And Moore's Furniture had a great big fire. Bob and I had worked late that night. We were doing books, and we went to the Husky for supper. And then when we came back, we noticed that Moore's was on fire. We saw fire and smoke on the top of the building, and boy, did it turn into a fire. Anyway, the printing shop is this little building in the middle, right there. There's Moore's Furniture. It's on fire, and we get not burnt, but we got a lot of water, and we got drowned, and we were done in that building, and so we made a deal on this one. This was Motor Car Supply, and they were closing, and that building became available. We thought, well, if we fix it all up, we could do that. So it became that. And your office is upstairs in that building
That's
nowadays.
now where Bernie Leahy's real estate office is, and that's the home of Bring Back the Porch.
So that turned into a real nice printing shop. But I got itchy feet, and I left the business and went to work at IXL Industries.
You had a thing for flying, though. Aircraft was...
Oh, yeah. Did we pass all that?
Well, you had an opportunity to take some flying training.
Okay. Well, yeah, a little bit before that, I did take some flying training. And there was a number of guys that I knew. Roy Fileski was one of them. And we had some good training. Roy Fileski and I bought this airplane. And before we bought it, though, we rented a plane after we got our license. And we flew it out to Elkwater. And we drew straws to see who would land the plane on top of the bench at Elkwater and who would take it off. And, land on the grass and in between the trees. And I got the chore of taking it off, and he landed it. And we wanted to prove that we were real pilots. If you could get off on that and land there, you were doing pretty good, actually. Then we bought this guy.
And this is a Globe Swift.
This is a Globe Swift. This was an American training aircraft during the Second World War. It was a nice airplane. It was fast. It was scary. It stalled at about 100. And you remember Jim Simpson, who had freelance photos? He wanted to take a picture of a plane flying real low along the runway. And so I said, I'll do it. And so I took it up and around and got right down on the deck, and he took that shot. Yeah, it was a good little airplane. We had it for a number of years. When I went with IXL, they had 2 airplanes. And there is the brick plant.
In Redcliffe?
In Redcliffe, yeah. Now, in my day, IXL had, I think, 7 or 8 plants. Malcolm could correct me on that. Somewhere around that, 7 or 8. And I worked for his dad, and I was appointed marketing director. So I was in charge of marketing, and it was a good position for me. I knew a little bit about the brick business, but boy, when I saw all that clay there, I got ideas, I'll tell you.
That's
because I was already potting by then, and drawing and painting, but I was into pottery and making three-dimensional sculptures and things. And when I saw all that clay at IXL, I thought, there could be something done with this. And long story short, I spent a decade, the 1970s, at IXL, traveling all over the country. I really loved it. It was an absolute super place to work. Great people, great company, and but I wasn't there for a career. And I knew Malcolm was coming from university, and I thought, well, I'll make some room. And
then I think Frank Westgarth was instrumental
Frank
in
Westgarth,
helping you.
He retired from his painting business, and he was an artist as well, and a real good one. And he wanted to start a little gallery. We had no gallery in Medicine Hat, and really we don't almost again. I wish we had a gallery.
His original was up on the hill.
It was actually where Ernie's used to be.
Okay.
Across from the chocolate shop. And then he retired from that finally, and Neil Burbage took it over, bought it out, and he ran it there for a little while, and he had a building built on South Railway Street, which is there.
It was quite the time, though, because you changed jobs, decided to step out as an entrepreneur, and you came up with this idea of
we were doing drawings and paintings and stuff and selling, and we did really well while that gallery was running.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he closed the gallery, everything went.
Yeah.
And I had this idea about carving bricks.
Yes.
And I happened to know somebody that was working there, and I was able to get bricks unfired, and I could carve them, and Malcolm actually let me build a small studio in part of the brick plant that wasn't being in use, where the old glazed brick plant used to be. And I created a studio there and built Mike's son Mike and I built a big easel in there, and I created murals for the first time in there.
I remember you telling me that you were in with a group of architects and telling them about your ideas, and their faces lit up.
Yeah.
And that was when you knew you had something.
Yeah, well, before I left IXL, I was going to these conferences of architects, usually in Toronto and Vancouver, and the architects all went to it. And we had a booth and a display and that kind of thing. And I put a little easel in there, and I carved some bricks while the show was on. And I got a big crowd. And I knew I had something going for me because the architects just really crowded around.
So that was your aha moment.
Yeah, that was. So I knew I had a job if I moved on.
Yeah, I think you have a photo of the Cottonwood Gallery.
There's Cottonwood Gallery, the last gallery, and I did a mural for them.
Yeah. Maybe tell everybody when you made those brick murals. You would have them on a big easel, and you'd be up on scaffolding and working on it.
Yeah, there's a big easel, slopes back a little bit, has a shelf on it that you can set bricks on. You lay the bricks up like you're laying bricks, with spaces in between. IXL used to trim the block that they would make for me, and I could use that as mortar in between the bricks.
Mm-hmm.
And that way when I carve, I could carve right through all the clay. I wouldn't have these interruptions every joint.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked out a really good system. And built some very big murals. One, probably the biggest one, was 50 feet long and 10 feet high. It was built some really nice big ones.
But that's just half of the job. Once you finished it, you've got to take it apart.
Well, you carve it all,
Yeah.
then you glaze color parts of it, and then you take it apart brick by brick, put it into drying racks. You leave it there for a month to dry it, and then you take it brick by brick and load a kiln. And I built a big kiln to fire them in, and you fire them, and then 3 or 4 days later it's cool enough to unload, and you put them into boxes, and they're boxes that have compartments in, so each brick is protected. You load the boxes on a truck or a trailer, and away you go to the job. You take a bricklayer with you, or you get one where you're working, and you work with the bricklayer. He lays the bricks, and I go along behind him and do all the mortar.
And you have to know which brick goes where, so you've numbered them, or how did you?
Yeah, the bricks are numbered, number on the top, and you just lay them out row by row on the easel, and it's row by row when you're bricking them up.
Almost like putting a puzzle back together.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. It works really, really well. He lays the bricks there, and then I tool the joints and usually add color, a strip of color in there as well to match the bricks, or the glaze, whichever. And it works out really, really neat. Once it's dried and cured, it's there forever.
Yeah.
And nothing hurts it.
Yeah. And they are all over the world.
Well, I did a lot across Canada, pretty much. I didn't get to Quebec, though, or the Maritimes, but pretty well all of the other provinces, Montana in the States, a couple of murals there. Even got over to Japan, put one there, and there's 2 that I had something to do with in England.
Yeah.
So I had a good run.
You also got, as you mentioned too, you got into the Alberta Historical Society. You got a nice little commission to travel around doing drawings of some historical buildings.
Yeah, I did. I had that show at the Glenbow, and there was a booklet printed of all those drawings, and it went really very well, and I was really keen about saving these historic buildings. So we formed a provincial committee, and I worked with 4 or 5 guys and traveled around Alberta, and a lot of them were I drew, and to try and save them. I started to worry about home too, and Ted Grimm was mayor back then, and I said it's time we had a committee in Medicine Hat to look after the historic buildings we have, because we had some real good ones.
We lost a lot too.
Oh yeah. He agreed, and we formed a committee, and I was the first chair of that, and we had a nice group of people that I worked with, and we did save a number, but we did lose the odd one. The one I regret the most was the convent.
St. Teresa's Academy.
Yep, St. Teresa's Academy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've refused to drive up Eldawana Drive for years.
Yeah. Well, you'll be glad to know that the windows have been saved.
Yeah, the windows are
Robert Wiseman has saved
they're going into
them.
a new school.
The new school, the Holy Trinity School that is being built right now. So in a way, everything's coming full circle.
Yeah.
Bruce was saying, that he has trouble drawing stick figures, and he has company with me. How in the world do you spend? How much time did it take you to do a drawing like City Hall?
I never wanted to know.
No, you take it from an old picture and you just start drawing.
No, I take it from a picture, all right. And I do it architecturally. I've got a drafting table, and I drew all the down main coordinates and the horizontal, and then I just start filling it in with artwork.
So how big would it have been? The physical.
Oh, about what you just did.
Okay, so 3 by 5, 3 feet by 5 feet, maybe.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
3.
Yeah, and brick buildings, and of course I love brick buildings, but boy, all those bricks, that's something to draw.
And that's where your eyesight comes in.
Yeah, I've got good eyesight, luckily. Well, I had a nice exhibition at Glenbow as a result of that first thing where I went around the province, And we did that. We had that Alberta committee that saved buildings, and then we got it going here in Medicine Hat, which is good. It started really with the post office. When they were going to knock down the post office, and I was still working with my dad at the time, and I said to Dad, why on earth would they knock down a beautiful building like that? And he said, well, they want to build a new one. And I said, how can we get that stopped? And he said, well, go talk to Harry Viner. Ooh, that was a mistake.
Yeah. For those who may not know, the Sandstone Post Office was just across the street here.
I think there might be a picture somewhere.
Kitty corner to City, or across the street from City Hall. Now there you are. You're making the mural that is outside the council chamber in the new City Hall.
Yeah, well, that's when I started making murals and got my studio built at home. And the first mural that I really did officially was this one. And it was the Rotary Club, actually, that I belonged to, the Psalmist Rotary Club, sponsored it. And they wanted to put something in the new City Hall, something of art in the new City Hall, but something that was hard to get rid of. You know, if they got, when they get bored with it and a little tired of it or get something better, then that thing goes, Yeah. So I said, I've got the perfect idea if you got lots of money. And I presented this idea. I had a sketch similar to that. It wasn't quite like that. And it turned them on, and they went for it, hey, Billy? And that's me at the IXL studio working on the top half of it. It was big enough that I had to do it in two pieces. I think that thing was about 14 feet high.
14 feet.
Yeah. And probably nearly the same wide, too. So this is just the top half.
And it's still there today.
And there it is in place.
Yep.
So that one was done with small bricks, regular size brick, and no glazed color or anything. That's just straight carved brick. Later I got into doing multicolored things, adding glazes and things like that.
Now when you're carving the brick, it's still soft. It's not hard.
No, it's soft.
Yeah.
And I cover it in plastic while I'm working on it. I don't know if that one before, it shows the plastic a little bit, but I'm really at the very end right here now. Normally I would start at the top and just do a little bit. I've skipped a beat here, actually. After I've made, I usually had my kids help me lay the brick up, Mike and Steve, and we laid the bricks up, and I used Donnacona back in those days. In between the bricks, I cut strips of Donnacona, and I would carve out, draw the image out on the bricks just with a steel tool, and I could just sketch it out and have marks on the face of the brick, and then I'd carve away the background, and then detail the foreground, and that's what I'm doing there. And then when I'm all done, I start at the highest numbered brick and take it down, and they just come down one at a time into drying racks.
Now, when this brick is soft, how fast do you have to work before it hardens in?
Well, you got to keep it covered. I just open small sections at a time.
Okay, keep it moist.
I have it open to draw the whole thing out quickly, and then I cover it all over with plastic, and then I just open little sections. And it's a little tricky, but it works. And a little tricky putting the two pieces together, but it worked out.
So the murals, though, were, I guess, the aha moment for you. That was what kept you as an artist kept you? You weren't a starving artist after this.
Well, you got pretty good money for these, and they were a pretty major piece of art. There's a lot of volume there, and they were pretty unique. There was nothing like that going on, except 5,000 years ago. The Babylonians used to do this. I didn't invent it, but they didn't do it the same as I did, but same idea.
Yeah.
And now we're doing pretty good. And we doing murals. We had a little money for holidays, and our archaeology interests were keen, and we decided to go down. We worked hard every month but October. We took October off once we got really settled, and the house all moved and whatnot, and we loaded up a little camper and we went down to the southwest. Arizona, Utah, that sort of country, and looked up all the ruins of the Anasazi people, and toured all the museums and so on, and just had a hell of a good time, and camped the whole bit. And I had different vehicles, and they all got down there. There's a Land Rover or a Land Cruiser and a different camper. So different cars, different campers. My first Suburban, and we went into some pretty crazy places. Usually only Jeeps go down into the maze and down to the Grand Canyon and so on. I got that Suburban down there and out.
And your knuckles were pretty white?
I stopped at the ranger station because I left the camper at the ranger station, and took the Suburban down, and then came back up, and I went in. They were closed when I went down, and I went in to see them, and I said, "Where'd you come from?" And I said, "Well, I was down in the bottom of the maze. We hiked down there, and I took my car down there." And he said, "You took your car down there? What car did you take down there?" And I said, "It's parked outside." And he went out and had a look at it. He says, "You got that thing down there?" I says, "Yeah." But I did. There's proof.
Yeah.
There's me ma. That's a picture of Mum at 100 years old. And she got to be 12 days short of 101.
Oh.
And she had to be in this. And I wanted to tell you about, I'm on a hike. I did the West Coast Trail. I got 2 or 3 pictures of me walking the trail. It's I think it's 48 miles, and it's a lot of up and down. And I had 2 friends gonna go with me. The first guy pooped out on the training before we went, and the other guy lasted the first day, and that was it. So I gave him the keys to my car, and I carried on my own. The first day was beautiful, sunny and everything. From there on, it was rain, day and night. And I think I was about another 7 days. This is up the wrong way. There's ladders all through there that you got to climb.
Part of the trail?
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. And lots of stone walls that you climb too.
And you were how old when you did this?
I was 70 years old when I did this. I was the oldest guy there.
Amazing.
And the rain was, I traveled alone after the one guy quit, and I did catch up to 3 young people that were walking, 2 girls and a guy, and the one girl had such a mouth on her that I couldn't stand her. After the first day, I jettisoned them, and caught up to another guy, and he had a young boy with him that was doing okay. He was maybe 12 or 13, and you have to walk the beach, some of it too, and then when you're going off the beach to the trail and climbing up to the trail, you got to get over all these drift logs that are along the edge of the sea there, or the ocean, and they're wet and slippery, and of course it's raining, cats and dogs, and we both fell because the logs were really slippery, And what happened with me is you wore gaiters, and I hooked my strap under my foot in a branch on the logs, and it tipped me over. And he fell too, but he really hurt himself. And so I spent 2 days helping him get to a place where he could get out. And you can use I had a cell phone, and you could phone, and they would send a rescue unit to a certain place and take you out. And I could have gone out with him. The other guy that I was walking with and his kid, they went with him. And I carried on alone. I think I was 8 days.
8 days. You did something that I never would have even attempted, because that just amazes me that you would go 46 miles through all of this at the age of 70. Yeah.
Well, it was good exercise.
Yeah, good. And now you're coming up on your 87th birthday, and you're not stopping.
No.
You're just going to keep on going.
I go to work every day. Still do lots of walking and hiking.
Yeah. Why is that?
I don't know if I want to do the trail again, but I think I could do it, actually.
Okay. Well, Jim, thank you. This has been an enjoyable evening, and I'll turn things over to Bruce. This episode was produced in partnership with the Medicine Hat Historical Society. Special thanks to James Marshall. Produced by Brian Konrad and Lynette Schneider. Technical Director Bob Schneider. Production team Curtis Nash and Serena Grona. Music by Epidemic Sound.